there's opportunities to pool resources. So I think in the interest of time, I'm going to move to occupant behavior. And Kate, I think you're going to kick us off.
In conventional buildings, the pie chart of how energy is used has lots of energy for heating, lighting, cooling, and occupant behavior. The choice plug load, the choices that occupants can make that impacts a building are a small slice of the whole. These buildings at EUIs of 25 and below have dramatically shrunk the energy that they spend on heating, cooling, lighting, plug load. And so it means that the choices that occupants make are more impactful. You can unbalance a building more easily as an occupant than you can in a conventional building. It's like paddling keeping a small boat balanced, and you want your people in the building to understand their responsibilities. Among the issues that will come up is plug load. Our energy model specified a certain number of refrigerators, certain number of microwaves, no personal coffee pots. So you want to make sure that people are not starting to creep that stuff into the building. I thought, as I said, I thought I was going to spend a lot of time on that, and because our building's operating well, I'm below the target. I had not had to spend that time, but I fully expected to, and I know there's stuff creeping in there that shouldn't be there. So be prepared for that, and be forthright with what the expectations are. In addition, the windows are operable in our building. We had a staff turnover as the building was opened, and I wound up in a closer relationship to the building than I anticipated, managing the opening it and integrating our kids and faculty and facilities people into the building. Had been asking about operable windows and how they were going to be managed. Those questions weren't answered until we got to that moment, and sure enough, as I anticipated, the answer was that the operable windows shouldn't be opened. If you open them when there's moist air during a time when you're providing cooling, the radiant panels up in the ceiling are going to get wet and start dripping and introduce a lot of moisture to the building. So you're going to need to communicate with people. And when I called the superintendent to tell him what had emerged, he said, "Why? So tell me why we paid for operable windows." And that was a really good question. And something to think about. Coming out of COVID, I don't think anybody would have built a building without operable windows, probably, but it's a thing to think about. So some places have little red lights. Well, I toured a building, federal building, that had a little red light, little green light that cued the occupants when the windows could or could not be open. That's not a system we ever considered and wouldn't have paid for it, but you do want to be aware about needing to communicate about windows. And the best source of fresh, clean, conditioned air is through the ventilation system. In addition, our thermostats have displayed the CO2 level in the room, and so because we use displacement ventilation in this building, which is becoming the standard, there's no whooshing unit ventilators, and the teachers were feeling that they weren't getting any ventilation because they couldn't hear it and couldn't feel it the way they were used to. So it was very helpful to be able to go to the thermostat and push it and show them that the CO2 level in the room was terrific, and they were getting state-of-the-art ventilation. So that was also a very helpful tool for occupants. Jim.
Can I have the slides?
They didn't get loaded.
Okay.
They're not loaded on this. So if you just want to pull through, and we'll upload it after.
Okay.
Yep. So we'll have it after.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're actually in the displacement ventilation building as well. So it is a learning process of not putting things in front of the displacement ventilation diffuser. In terms of building occupant behavior, so I'm going to use one example to give you a good sense of where things are. With the help of the automation consultant, that they are monitoring they get both all the metering and all the input from the building control system, and they also get the energy use from the actual Eversource data. that you get the bill for. And that in one of the, so this building opened at in February of this year. And in April, during one of our regular meetings, that we discovered that there was a spike at 9 o'clock in the morning. The whole group just sort of went around trying to figure out what could cause that spike in the use. And the best guess was that the kitchen staff comes in and they turn on everything all at the same time. As soon as that is, that we sort of speculated that in the meeting, Tom Carey, the director of facility who was in the meeting, immediately started, I forgot whether he called or texted the kitchen staff and asking them to modify the behavior right there. And then the next time when we reviewed it, that spike disappeared. And then the estimate for that particular spike in terms of demand surcharge is somewhere between $2,000 to $3,000 a month of demand surcharge that is that the district doesn't have to pay for. And I want to plug in this one thing that in this particular project we have probably the best team possible. Everybody was there to make the project better. There was no finger pointing, there was no argument. Well, there were arguments, but different kind of arguments. The arguments is primarily about how to make the project better. And when there's a need to make some changes, the staff, Tom is the director of facility. He is now the food service director. But the food service people have no quorum, just simply have no issue of just simply go ahead and make the modification, and then that will benefit the project and the district. And that was that I really have to say that really appreciate the leadership in terms of the central district, in terms of the people, and then we did have a lot of problem with the construction. In fact, that we lost the entire. We have 6 chillers that makes hot and cold water, but
6 modules.
6 modules that makes a hot and cold water for the building, but all of them got burned out due to a voltage modulation that happened on the street from the EverSource, and then so we had to actually overcome that problem to open the school. But partially because of that, we ended up having very good working relationship, and everybody just simply jumped in, and then we had these regular meetings about energy consumptions. And Mary, this is going to be, I'm not trying to disagree with you, but this is just data. By April of this year, 2 months after we opened the door, the energy consumption was already at 15% below the projected number. And that held down in May. However, the summer month, the use pattern was different from the anticipated, number one, and number two, we did not put in the schedule the schedule that was in the HVAC, the control was not as well aligned with what was happening. So we ended up with 3 months of 2.5 times of the anticipated use, because we assumed almost no use.
So I'm gonna pause you there because we're running a little behind.
Sorry.
And I'm glad you clarified, the energy usage is going well.
Yes.
I was talking more about changing seasons, new staff, occupants who don't know how to use the controls, lighting, things of that nature. So, there's a lot more to the building than, not today, but there's a lot more to the building than energy usage.
No,
Bill,
yes, there's still other problems. Yes.
absolutely, Bill, take us home.
Okay. Thanks. So Belmont's behavioral shift from the owner's side started during visioning, and actually, as soon as the MSBA brought us into the program, invited us in the program, I remember one of the first or second meetings, I had public standing up in front of me in 2016 and saying this had to be a ZME building. I actually had to go home that night and research what ZME actually meant back then. Of course, we all know that now, but that's the strength that the people that are going to be supporting, funding the building is bringing to the project. So, so during visioning and also during early parts of design, this was in the forefront. Occupant behavior change. We can't just design a building; it has to be supported. So plug loads, you talked about that, right? That's the biggest thing, you drive it down. The habits of having coffee makers and so forth in the room, that was discussed and it was talked about ending before they even moved into the building. CO2 sensors, you leave the room, things are shutting down. 24/7 operation of things, plug loads in the building, in the classrooms is gonna end as well, and that was discussed. So that trickle energy drain overnight was stopping. Temperature settings, the days of going in and turning your dial and so forth, that was changed. We found that changing the temperature just a couple of degrees was going to have a significant impact in the energy. So now the facility director sets the temperature, and that's that, and folks are accepting it. And finally, windows. I won't go into the story, Kate kind of already said, but Belmont's little story is during design, significant debate. Operable windows, not operable windows. And of course, facilities, we don't want to open windows. And then teachers and parents standing up, we need operable windows. 4 inches, they're only gonna open, right, safety, but we need operable windows. We looked at the red and green light, as a matter of fact, as well. Oh boy, that wasn't gonna work, very expensive. In the end, Belmont has operable windows. But I will say with our chilled beams and so forth, I heard a couple of instances of happening, but that spreads really fast and teacher habits change really, really quick. The facilities folks said, we don't have the resources to close over 100 windows a night if people are opening. And I don't hear that anymore. So occupant behavior does change. It doesn't take long. It worked out very well for Belmont. Thank you.
That's great, thank you. I would ask our panel members to stay, because I'm going to combine some Q&A. Tom, if you could come up and join us. Our next session, I'll hold questions on all of these till the end. Our next section is system maintenance. Tom, I believe you're going to kick us off.
Yes, thank you. I'm Tom Kazunas from CHH Solutions, project executive. I was a project executive on the Belmont Middle and High School. We talked a lot of it, about leaks, and we did have leaks. In Belmont, we had the situation where we constructed the high school first, and then the middle school came on second. And as we were doing that, we had a significant valve blowout, a fitting actually let go inside the building. What did that do? That introduced a whole lot of air into the geothermal well system. We chased it. We thought it was all due to that one fitting that had blown. After chasing it for a long time, we finally brought in some high efficiency pumps to help us push the fluid, the water, and the theory was we were going to push all of the air out of the system. Well, as we did that, we discovered, lo and behold, we had a leak somewhere in the well field system. It wasn't just that fitting that had blown out. Because of the way the system was designed, we were able to isolate the 3 well fields and then isolate it further into actual individual wells. Again, it was talked about the need for good as-builts. Not only were we able to isolate it to the individual wells, but we knew exactly where those well heads were. Long story short, dig it up, open up those heads under landscaping, so it wasn't under hardscape. We really designed most of our system to be under landscape features. Able to find it, isolate those 3, repair them, go back in, purge all of the air out of the system, and we've had minimal additional fluid. Now, you're gonna have some fluctuations as the air leaves your fluid. It will cause you to have to bring in more of the fluid into the system, but we're now running at pretty much steady state with minimal amounts that have to be brought in. But the real take home here is make sure that your personnel know what to look for. If there's, this anomaly of needing to add fluid into the system, they need to recognize that something's going wrong there. That shouldn't be happening. Again, we were blaming it on a valve or a fitting that had blown out when that was actually not the case. So make sure, again, that good as-bills, don't allow the contractor to cover everything until, those drone footages, the aerial footage, and details of locating exactly where every well is where it's located is critical. And then
Sean.
balancing, I'm sorry, I just wanted to, yeah, one more piece. The balancing of the well field. It's critical, you know, everyone knows that you balance the HVAC system in your building, you balance airflow. Well fields are the exact same thing. You need to balance that system so that the wells that are closest to the plant aren't receiving the primary flows. You know, the longer the run is, the more resistance there's going to be in that well field. So the system needs to be able to be balanced. Make sure that's built into your plans and specs right from the very beginning. Not only the ability to balance, but that the system is actually balanced after everything is turned on. We had a phased approach, as I talked about, and you really can't balance until the entire building is online, because it has dramatic differences in how that system will function. Thanks, Sean.
I think Tom just stole my thunder. I got the same thing. So when you have a system that's underground, you need strategies in place to outline the repair process, whether it's the geothermal well system or the building system. Ask your engineering and design teams, can you give me a plan? Can you give me a process? How do I follow this? What design pressures am I looking for here and there? And then maybe your guys will be able to, and gals will be able to understand what the system should be doing. So we recently were dealing with a loss of pressure and air in a hydronic system in the building, which, as you know, indicates a major problem with water flow. Before finding the leak that caused the pressure loss, we enlisted the help of a mechanical design engineer, geothermal engineer, and various other contractors that specialize in these systems. So we're almost into a retro commissioning process even after the building was just built, so be ready for something like that. We started by isolating the building from the geothermal well system. We critically charged the building side of the system, tested pressures for over a 24-hour period, and there was no pressure drop. So we did the same with the geothermal side, which did show a pressure drop. This allowed us to determine the issues on the geothermal side. As I mentioned previously, we had 10 circuits, 8 wells on each circuit. We were able to access the manifold in the underground geothermal valve to start idling pressures on each circuit to figure out which circuit might be leaking. We were able to figure out that it was the circuit, and going to the maps and digging up, we actually ended up finding a leak. So we found that 8 out of the 9 circuits held pressure, 1 of the circuits lost pressure. We utilized documentation as built to determine approximate locations of the circuit piping in the wells, dug in the middle of the circuit. We're doing subsystem by subsystem, test the pressure on each side. The side that showed loss was where we started to dig. Lo and behold, boom, the leak was right there at the top end of the soil. We didn't have to dig down and or isolate a circuit and, you know, maybe lose load on the building. It looks like whoever was installing a tree at some point in time might have nicked the piping, and it just took time for it to actually open up holes. So you've been told that a geothermal leak is a 1 in a million. In my years, I've never seen one. But fortunately, we had ourselves in a good position of having the proper documentation, the right people within our department, and knowing the right people to bring in when we needed that help. So be ready to get that help.
Great, thank you so much. So with that, I'm going to open it up for questions. It can be regarding this last system maintenance or occupant behavior. We have a couple of minutes. Pat?
What is the
From
system
Springfield?
function like when it's down? Like, how long were you down for, and is it no heat in the air, or what does it look like?
I'm going to say that your geothermal, not your heat pump system is going to tell you right away there's a problem. You got multiple barrels going, depending on who you purchased for a heat pump. They don't operate well without the right temperature and the right flow. Your building's not going to heat up, it's not going to cool down, it's going to be screaming at you right from the get-go. HVAC guy is going to chase after the normal stuff. You know, where do I got a leak? Do I look at my coils and my drains? Do I see glycol in those drains? Do I see air purges burping off? What do my expansion tanks look like? Are they keeping pressure? You know, how does the internal of that system work between the building water and the geothermal water, and what happens within that box? You really got to kind of understand that. and have people trained in that. It's really, they talk to the manufacturer after this is over, can you do a training here, and, cause my guys don't wanna go to Milwaukee. Just saying.
Did you have to like close school, or was it down for a period of time?
No, we limped, right? It's, you know, you're doing this, right, until the weekend comes and you're like, you better have your plan and your act together. We looked for a Friday where it was professional development, when nobody was in there. We got Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So to do the testing, and then we backed away, back to the same routine, and then had everybody looking at it and going for a week, where we could actually charge in huge tankers of glycol to push air out of the system in the geothermal, make sure that it was critically charged, go back to the pressures, testing the pressures, having the pressure report and saying, yep, it all looks the same right now, and then releasing it, and then found the leak. We're still chasing after the actual heat pump because it wasn't set up properly. So maybe the guy that installed it didn't know what he was doing, but now we have the manufacturer who's in Waltham, luckily, who when I go like this, he's in the room bus. So, you know, we're lucky like that.
I think we have time for one more question, sir.
Dennis Kelly, Town of Wilmington. So, when we talk about circuits of the wells, when we talk about, people designed with 80, went to 60 or 100, and went down to 80. Should there be some kind of redundancy like you would with boilers and pump systems, where there's a circuit, so when you lose one, that circuit should be, when you build it, so that you can turn that one on and feed the system while you shut one down? Or is it built so there is no redundancy or no extra circuit?
So I'll let them talk, but as we talk about wells and cutting wells down, it's really the design of the building that cuts it down. I still think that an engineer would put some redundancy in there. Obviously, you can't valve off 8 heads and still have the same load, but you can valve them off and get the building running, and then maybe chase and say, guess what? We gotta throw 3 of these away and cap off or recircuit, you know, and regain some of that back. You would do that, but I'll leave up to others what the redundancy would be, you know, 2 cast iron boilers that could heat 9 schools in a school. That's kind of not the way anymore.
Yeah, I can answer from our perspective on our project. I know our engineer, Jonathan McPhail from McPhail is here, and also, correct me if I'm wrong, but he basically designed it so that we could actually operate the building with 50 wells, and so they had an extra, maybe 52 or 53 with an extra 7 wells for that extra redundancy or fluctuation. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, and you don't need all the wells operating from the get-go. So it's really, you're designing for like a 20-year or 30-year design period. So it's at the end of that period, you may need all the wells, but in the shorter term, you can get by without a circuit or 2. You know, you can go down 5-10 wells and still operate with the temperatures you need to.
And I'd like to mention too, that these building envelopes are extraordinary. So you have a lot of coast time. I mean, you can go for days and not need new inputs in terms of heat. The building holds temperature.
Kate, I'll just say that Belmont designed for our maximum needs, but that's peak time, right? That's the other thing. And you know, we have peak. The other thing too is, you know, you might be a little warm in the building at peak. That's okay, it's peak. And finally, the design at, you know, for peak is not happening most of the time. And our building is operating, ours is operating about 15% under design. So already you have now 15% more capacity in the well field if you're operating below your original design expectations.
I'm just gonna make a couple of quick points before my old mind loses those points. To Kate's point and everybody else's point on plug load, you should have a energy policy procedure in place. If you need one, you got one, ask for it. Make sure you get support of the administration, that they would stand behind you, that you can go in and remove plug loads and how you would do that nicely, to say this needs to get out of the building. When it comes to window use, in Lexington, we use dew point control. Somebody opens up the window, it's humid outside, that humidity comes into the room, the dew point of the room goes up, the cooling valve closes. They learn very fast to close the window when the room's not cooled.
Great, thank you so much. So, one housekeeping item, I just want to remind folks that the restrooms that are available to us are the restrooms on either side of the water fountain. They're marked staff bathrooms. Please use the staff bathrooms, not the student bathrooms, which are also on this hall. Please stick with the staff one. So as part of preparing for your project, we're gonna change up the schedule on you so you can practice your preparedness and ability to shift. We're gonna go on our building tour right now. What you should know is that your name tag has a letter. So please take a look at your name tag, and we have tour guides available. Superintendent is tour A. So you're going to align yourself with a tour guide, and we'll be going on tour for about 40 minutes or so. We will be starting the tour in different sections, but everybody will see the same parts of the school. Sorry, wonderful, thank you, Barbara. First and foremost, before we leave on the tour, please thank our panel, my colleagues. I'm going to get us started by turning this over to Lama for budget planning.
Thank you. So I'm Lama Jean-Baptiste. I'm the Director of Finance and Operations in the Westwood Schools. Just first as an intro to budget planning, I want to focus on the operating budget and how we thought about that in the context of this project. Westwood did go the direction of increasing our in-house capacity to support our buildings when we knew this building was coming. And so 3 years before Pine Hill opened, what we did is we were recruiting for a new facilities director. That was a coincidence, but our prior facilities director retired. And in recruiting for a new person for the role, the superintendent really had a vision of trying to get someone who had professional training in facilities management or the expertise to operate a building like this. So we were aggressive in trying to seek out strong candidates. We ultimately found a facilities director who's superb, who has actually background as facilities director at the Museum of Fine Arts and had seen the American Wing there erected, and so can't have deeper experience in building and construction. But in addition, I think the things that he brought to the team here are a specific and mindful approach towards empowering the staff under him. So I've seen him change the culture in that department in that way and really lean on the staff, our maintenance staff, lean on our electrician, and tell them that he's counting on them, and they've stepped up in that regard, so that was very important. That positive culture has been important for the opening of the building as well. So then 2 years before the opening day for Pine Hill, we also took a step in our operating budget, and we added a 0.5 admin assistant to support the facilities director. That's a unique circumstance in Westwood that our business office was kind of stretched, and our facilities director we found was doing a lot of paperwork, right? And something that someone else could be supporting with. We knew with this building coming up that he needed to be focused on the project, so we established that position, and that has remained. And then 1 year before Pine Hill opened, I advocated, and the facilities director also advocated for an HVAC controls position. So all of you who went on the tours got to meet both Tom Carey and Rob Green. Tom Carey being our facilities director and Rob Green being the HVAC controls specialist in this building right now, but he's also our specialist for the whole district. It is hard to justify these additional positions, and Westwood didn't find this easy because there are always difficult trade-offs, and when you want to invest money in instructional staff, making the case for doing that in operations is not easy. With the HVAC controls position, the way that we did this is by looking at our contractor expenses and understanding that we were becoming overly reliant on HVAC contractors, especially when it came to the programming and the BMS systems that we manage in our buildings. Our buildings were, some of them were still very old and worked on the traditional boiler systems, but we did have a lot of RTUs, and we were starting to see a change in the controls that we were using, and our in-house staff didn't have the knowledge to address them when something went down. So we were doing two things here. We were bringing someone on board who would be able to help us open Pine Hill and be able to learn the systems in this building, but also someone who could then become a resource for the whole district and hopefully help us keep our contractor costs down. We did realize, I think we realized a lot of gains when we saw the process, the construction process, and we started to have, as Chin alluded to, meetings with IDS. That was the consultant that we hired for looking at the data generated through our building management system. And they had come on board at the design phase, but we started meeting with them as the building came online, as the systems were active. We started meeting twice monthly. So our HVAC control specialist and our facilities director attended those meetings. They were listening to the engineers and the subcontractors talking about what was failing, what was working, how the zone settings were configured, when a variable, air volume system was not functioning correctly. That conversation, they were in the room for that conversation. And so I think Rob is just much more comfortable with that platform now, having been through so many meetings, rather than just one training session with a contractor who later goes away. So he's been here for that timeline, and it has meant a lot for us. I'd say he isn't as skilled as the folks who are some of the substance specialists who are here. And so we may continue, and Jim alluded to this, we may continue to keep IDS on board for another year. We're also looking at potentially having some kind of contract with one of the subs, RP O'Connell, potentially, so that Rob Green, our specialist, can call them if we need help with a challenge going forward.
That's wonderful. And, having had the opportunity to speak with Linda before, their title is Director of Finance and Operations here at Westwood Public Schools, but I feel like I'm talking to one of the project folks. She's so deep in their knowledge and understanding of the projects, and they are complicated. And so when you talk to the entire team here at Westwood, you could hear each one of them and how much they've invested in learning about what the project is, what it needs, and being able to have those difficult conversations about adding positions. So thank you for that. We have some time for a question or two. Any have questions?
So it's more of like a statement. So we're often challenged with keeping up with technology. As in the past 7 years in Needham, this man put 7 new buildings online, and trying to manage every new building has got a different set of technology, and there's just no way to train my limited staff. So we use an enormous amount of contracted services to manage these systems. There's no way around it. But is that kind of what you're seeing as well, given the complexity of the systems that, right now I had an open HVAC position out for almost 5 years, and I have not been able to fill. We're reducing it to a junior HVAC position, reducing the amount of years in service and requiring a license, but I'm assuming this is industry-wide of finding these qualified FTEs and not using outside contractors.
I think that's true. I mean, we went through it, we debated a little bit what kind of position to post when we were looking for an HVAC support position, because we wondered whether we wanted more of a mechanic or a control specialist. Ultimately, we decided to go for the control specialist. I was also skeptical that we would have a highly qualified candidate who would come forward. We found one, which was fortunate in our case. But I also think he didn't know the systems here at all. So, I mean, no matter what, because there is a wide breadth of knowledge now that these technicians have to have, it was important to have the person, on board early and to allow him a lot of exposure to the experts, and then to think about whether we engage in a contract, a more reduced cost contract, in the future, but some kind of contract, so that on an on-call basis we can consult with the subcontractors who originally designed the system if we need to. Yeah, so we're keeping that.
Sir?
Hey, Christopher Chu, Superintendent in Westford. Lemma, were you involved in the school building committee, or was a member of the town finance?
I was on the school building committee, as was the town finance director. Yeah.
Thank you.
Just a quick question. We talked a lot about consultants coming in right at the design phase, the IDS, and there was even an envelope design consultant, I believe, that came on board. Is all that MSBA housing reimbursable, or is that additional exceptions, exclusions to be reimbursed?
So Jim, you can maybe support me on that, because I don't know to what extent all of them are covered. Some,
The envelope consultant was not covered under the MSBA contract, but the amount of money we spend on that is definitely worth it, because we didn't spend a huge amount on that, and we also got additional commissioning for the envelope beyond the MSBA basic service, because we really, let's put it this way, if we don't have a good envelope, doesn't matter how good your HVAC system is.
What about IDS though, that when the team had ready the design phase?
No, that's also outside.
Outside?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So for those who may not be familiar, the MSBA does offer a commissioning program that starts once the project has been approved locally. We assign a commissioning consultant that works through design, development, construction, and a year after substantial completion, but the scope of that work is a percentage base of the building, and so many districts opt to enhance the commissioning with additional services to supplement their project and also somewhat tailored to what they might have in local support. We are seeing an increased need, or I don't know if we're seeing an increased need or we're seeing an increased usage of, especially for IDS, which is energy managers. So how many districts actually monitor their energy right now? Right.
Net metering credit.
Pardon?
Just the net metering credit.
Yeah. So it's a pretty complicated concept, right?
Yeah.
So, but so key. EUI, what's the rates? You've heard people monitoring the plug loads. Somebody dedicated looking to that type of information is so key in everything we're talking about here. So there's a big shift and a big learning curve. I do want to just take a moment. Kate Crosby shared this clip with me from the Boston Globe. It has to do with recent legislation that went in front of Governor Healy yesterday, I believe, to sign. It's a comprehensive energy bill, including provisions to curb natural gas and speed up permitting for more green energy. And so it talks about 3 successive climate bills which have been a focus, setting ambitious legally binding targets for cutting climate warming pollutions. She was at an event I was at yesterday speaking about Massachusetts continuing to be a leader in this area for climate change and being on the front edge. She had speakers at that conference with Mass CEC and Mass Technology, all of whom she has coming together to talk through these particular issues. So thanks for sharing, Kate. All right, so with that, I'll move to the next section, which is also Lemma's going to share some tips for success.
Thank you. So first I want to just say that, and this some of the districts here may have experienced this, but opening a school building and as a consolidation of 2 other elementary schools, mid-year, midwinter, and it's a geothermal building with new systems and technology we had not experienced before. That was nerve-wracking. And we were faced with a unique challenge in that there was a winter storm on December 18th that took the power out. And this happened 8 weeks before move-in day. When that storm happened, we got a phase imbalance message on the system, on the tandem chiller systems that those of you who were in the mechanical room saw. So all 6 condensers and the 12 compressors in that phase imbalance were damaged. And we understood very quickly that they had to be completely replaced. This is 8 weeks before opening day. It was quite a moment where it was a jaw-dropping moment where we just didn't know what to do. So we could have panicked and started jumping to conclusions about who did what wrong. What I saw the team do is instead take a pause and slow down. And there were, trailer meetings at which we all sat around the table and asked questions, certainly, but there wasn't an accusatory approach, and we really went slowly through it. And I just want to say that was quite an experience because the folks, the level of collaboration and teamwork and communication was really strong. And we were fortunate in that regard, but I give some credit to the PDC chair who was in all of our trailer meetings weekly and really on top of the details for being informed and asking wise questions. Credit to our designer, architect, Rob, and also to Chin, who also stayed on top of the details and asked very careful questions of our construction team. Credit to Brait for leaning on their subs and for the subs for coming through. So they came through and they were able to find us replacement equipment in time to open. But it was a close call, and the superintendent was, there was one Friday where we were all hanging on a thread. We knew Friday at 1 o'clock we had to make the decision about whether this building would open on time or whether we had to delay until an April vacation opening date. And the superintendent decided to go for it, and without complete information at that moment in time. But there was a lot of teamwork there, and Kim sitting right next to me at Eversource was a key part of this process as well. During our meetings immediately after the compressor failure, Eversource made experts available to us and helped us to try to piece together what happened to our equipment and why it may have occurred. So I think the experience was unique to Westwood. I hope it doesn't happen to anyone, but at the same time, what it taught me was a couple of takeaways. Number one, it was really important for us to have a detail-oriented team. I could rely on the folks at the team, in particular our OPM and our designer, to follow through on the commitments that they made to answer the questions that were asked, and that was really critical here. We also had expertise, both in this team that the hired experts that were here, but also in the PBC and in the SBC. So our PBC chair was an engineer. There were members of the SBC who were highly talented folks. Having the combination of that was really important for pulling through. And finally, just a level of trust between the members and between our builder and our contractor and our architect. We were able to build that over time. I also trusted my facilities director, who was really superb. I mean, I spoke to how we hired intentionally for someone who would be qualified to run the building in the district, but I delegated a lot. So although Mary's giving me a lot of credit for having, a lot of technical knowledge, I actually would say I don't at all. I'm faking it here. But our facilities director is the guy with the technical knowledge, and I counted on him to be in all of those meetings and to keep us informed. And he, I think, felt empowered to not have to ask me for permission to make judgment calls or to answer questions when working with the construction team. So that was important.
How long from the time you started feasibility study to your move-in date? How long were you together as a team?
Only maybe a year and a half, but not from feasibility to move-in date, but because our facilities director came in after feasibility. I think he was.
Remember what year the feasibility study?
We started in September of 2019.
Yeah.
And we moved in February of 2024.
We actually we postponed it because of COVID. We actually pushed back a little bit on the time, on the schedule at one point.
So 3+. Yeah.
So
yeah, that's how long the full building team was together. Yes.
Yeah.
And their facilities director came in midway.
You're still probably together, right? Because you haven't gotten to final audit yet.
Yes, we are still together.
So my point is, it's a long-term relationship.
Yeah.
So you have to sort of go into it with that type of mindset. It's a long-term relationship. So communication, team reliance, expertise, level of trust, those things you have to fight for those things. People think, oh, we're a team, but teams take work to develop and to keep once you've started it. So congratulations to the Westwood team on that. That sounds like one of the more challenging move-in scenarios, although there are a couple stories out there. So that's wonderful, Emma. Thank you so much. So I think we're moving to our next information, which are next section, which is about cost incentives. With us today is to share expertise is joining Lemma is Kim Cullinane. I'm sorry, which one of you going first? Kim, you start?
Kim, I'll start.
Yeah, thank you.
And we don't have the slides.
No.
Now it's on. Do we have the slides or no? Okay, that's okay. So hi everyone, again, I'm Kim Cullinane and I'm with Eversource. And I want to emphasize too that today I'm representing all of the companies of MassSave. So I represent National Grid today, as well as Eversource, Liberty Utilities, Unitil, Berkshire Gas, and Cape Light Compact. So you may be familiar with MassSave from your own home. You may be aware that Eversource and National Grid and all those companies I just mentioned can provide energy efficiency services for you. We collect money from our ratepayers, or our electric and natural gas ratepayers. We're statutorily required to collect that money. We turn it around in the form of the incentives and technical assistance that we support for our customers. So that's who we are. In terms of eligibility for the programs, and I'll talk a little bit about what the programs are about. If you're building a brand new ground up building, you're eligible for program support if the new building will be a customer of either Eversource, National Grid, or Unitil. If you're going to do a renovation, a major renovation of an existing building, then the existing building has to be just a customer of one of the utilities that I just mentioned. And you'd be eligible for support. Additional eligibility requirement, this is by statute, one of the climate bills that passed, actually it was in 2022, requires that to be eligible for mass save support for a new building or a new home, you have to be all electric. So that's right along the lines of what we're talking about here is all electric buildings. So what I wanted to touch on today is one of the things that we do know about the cost effectiveness of doing this work is that doing a decarbonized building, and by decarbonized we're talking about fossil fuel free buildings, doing that makes the most financial sense when you're doing new construction or major renovation, because you're already starting from scratch basically. It gets really, really expensive to do this as a retrofit. And so you really want to think about future proofing your buildings. And I use that term intentionally because down the road, we're in a world now where we're talking about building performance standards. So we have some in place now in Boston. You've heard of BERDO, maybe BUDO is a similar ordinance in Cambridge. Other cities and towns are talking about it. There's also talk about a statewide building performance standard. And by that, what I'm talking about is sort of requirements for emissions reductions that ratchet down over time as we move to 2050. And in Boston, you know, there's penalties in place if you're not hitting those targets. So you really want to think about future-proofing your projects so that you're not putting yourself in a position to having to do a really costly, very costly retrofit down the road, and maybe even incurring penalties. The other thing I want to point out with why it makes sense now with a new building or major renovations, because there's a tremendous amount of financial support available right now for these projects. So Mass Save sponsors provide significant grants, since we participated, and we're very pleased to be here today seeing this building for the first time. I don't know if this is my first time here, but we worked together from 2019 with Chin and Rob and everybody here, and then with Kate and Acton Box Pro. So it is a long duration relationship. I mean, Kate and I are like we're buddies now, right? We text each other all the time. I mean, how many years have we been working together? 6 years, something like that, right? So, but we're very proud of the relationships that we've built and of the support that we've been able to. So what is the support about? So for Mass Save support, we were able to come in, I mentioned this earlier, come in and help set that energy budget. And now, I mean, when we started with some of these early projects, we didn't have a clear number in mind. Shin reminded me of this earlier. We didn't have a clear energy budget target. Now we know what that budget is for schools and what it makes it. And I can tell you right here today, it's a 25 energy use intensity, 25 EUI is the target for schools. We strive for that. We promote that with all the school projects that even if you can't work with us, even if you're with a city and town that is ineligible, I strongly encourage you to set an energy budget. You don't have to, if you're not necessarily eligible for Mass Save support, set an energy budget. Write it into your RFS for design services, your RFS for OPM services, and push the team to design towards that, to build towards it, and to operate towards that too. And that's really important. So one of the things that we do as Mass Save sponsors is we provide technical assistance to help set those targets, and then work with the design team to hit those targets. But then we also come in on the back end, and we've done that actually both with Pine Hill and with Acton Boxborough. We're partially funding the IDS contract that we've been talking about today, because what's really important is you can design these buildings to operate at very low energy use, but they have to actually be operated to hit that low energy use. And so the IDS contract that was mentioned is part of getting there. There's another contractor that's working with it. It's not just IDS, there's others that are out there that are excellent also. And so really setting that plan, executing that plan, and then following through. We don't succeed unless we measure. And so having a plan to measure for success. And that's where our support has come in, and we've also been, I think, I'd like to say successful in linking different parties too, and connecting people with experiences, and this is part of that too. I'm so thrilled that this is happening today, and I can commit to continue to be an extension of connecting people over time. So I wanted to talk about the Mass Save support. I also want to touch on investment tax credit support, the IRA tax credits that you may be familiar with. So significant support has been available for ground source heat pump systems specifically, 30, 40, even 50% tax credits, even for school districts that don't pay tax. There's something called direct pay that's available. So that, for the moment, is still available. We're hoping that it doesn't get rolled back with the new Congress. It may see some changes, let's be honest, it might see some changes, so let's keep an eye on that. But the school districts that you're seeing today, Westwood, Acton, Boxborough, pursued this goal without the availability of that tax credit. And the Mass Safe support is much more significant now than it was for either of these projects. With that, just next steps, definitely want to work your requirements into your RFS for services, as I mentioned. Investigate and understand the tax credits that are available. And then the last thing I'll say, and Mary mentioned it earlier, was municipal energy managers. If your city or town doesn't have one, Eversource and National Grid are rolling out new grants for paying for a position in cities and towns if you don't have one right now. So work with you're with school districts, but work with your city and town. And if there isn't someone there, consider applying for this grant that we are making available. There's going to be some info sessions coming up. And if you're a small city or town, you may want to collaborate with other small cities and towns right around you and apply for that grant together. But I'll be happy to talk with anybody about any of this after the session today.
Thank you, Kim. Does anyone have any immediate questions for Kim?
How does that affect regional school districts that don't really rely on the city town on that?
Yeah, so I'm trying to think I think you could apply on your own as a school district. I think that's true. Or you can just work directly with the individual cities and towns and try to pool them together and apply together for the grant, which may be the better option. But yeah, we'd be happy to talk to you more about that offline. And there's an info session coming up too.
Great,
Yeah.
Other questions? Sir?
Sorry, Lincoln from Framingham Public Schools. Do you see that as a multi-year grant, or is it one time and the city's on the hook after?
Yeah, it's up to a 3-year opportunity actually, and it's up to $120,000 per year. So to get renewed for each of the 3 years, you have to do energy efficiency work. You have to demonstrate that you're doing energy efficiency. But these positions typically pay for themselves. And so our hope is that we fund the position, and then the city or town, commits to doing it even beyond when we go away.
Thanks.
Yeah. Sir?
Jay from Chelmsford, a question for you. When you're talking about language going into RFPs for, say, design services and things like this, do you have any model language you'd recommend? Have you seen good language in RFPs that have gone out recently that a district may want to look at?
Yeah, I have a few examples, and so I'd be happy to share that. Contact me or come up and see me after. I'll take your card and share that with you. And that is something that we do try to share. Once we see those, we're trying to. I think I collected Westwood's. Actually, I think we have some language from Westwood. So I'll share with you what I have.
I saw another hand. Becca, was that you?
Yeah, Becca Wood, MCA. Do you see the energy manager and the IPS contract as separate entities? It's sort of a question for both of you. Like, would you, once you roll up your contract with IPS, would you try to pick up an energy manager for the district?
We have an energy manager actually in the town of Westwood. Yeah, we do, and this is prior to that grant program, so it's good that it's available now for communities that don't have that position, but we were fortunate. It's a part-time energy manager, but the town of Westwood has that position as well. And that was one reason why outside of this project, the town has pursued solar panel projects, EV chargers elsewhere. Yeah.
All right, Loma, would you like to share, please?
Okay, so I want to focus in this segment just on the project funding piece and the way that we approached that when it came to thinking about sustainability. So the superintendent and the school committee in this project, from early on, 2019, were very mindful how the project was discussed with members of the community. And one thing that I have thought about is that they were careful not to inadvertently commit to a project budget before the full work of the SBC had really, before they had gone through the course of the decisions that they needed to make around what does this building look like. So I think that was an important choice that they made. The school building committee was meeting and making critical decisions in April 2020. So you can think about what we were doing at that time. Also, we had just closed schools for the pandemic, but yet they were very forward-thinking and had established a sustainability subcommittee that looked at the options around what this building could and could not have. And they did know that there were like limited means, so there were budget constraints and trade-offs that had to be considered. So in that sustainability subcommittee, they evaluated options including an air source heat pump and what that target EUI might be achieved with that. We did think we might hit 25 with an air source heat pump, but ultimately they also looked at water source and geothermal heat. They looked at rainwater irrigation systems. They looked at timber frame construction. So there were a lot of considerations and discussions around what would be in the building. The geothermal system rose to the forefront because of the decision of the committee to really lower the UI to the best achievable number. And that geothermal system had the highest impact there. It did have a significant payback period, so they looked at the life cycle of the project and what that payback period would be. We at the time when we were making the decision thought that the geothermal system would have an incremental cost of about 3.5 or 3.6 million over other systems. So that was the differential that really we had to justify expending. And the SBC chair was open-minded when listening to experts on that committee speak to the reasons why we might want to consider this approach. I think Kim spoke to our group, and we did have, I'd say again, like talent and expertise in the membership of the SBC, so that people were really willing to debate this. The choice of the geothermal system helped us try to target exceeding the mass energy base code by 20%, and we were trying to also receive an additional MSBA incentive or higher reimbursement rate. So those were all of the variables that we considered. And when this project went forward, we asked the town for authorization for 87 plus almost $88 million for the design and construction of the building. We anticipated or hoped for an MSBA reimbursement. We thought that might be close to 18 million. And so we forecasted for the voters what would be the real borrowing cost. Now, again, as Mary kind of alluded, we didn't know that IRA was coming. So the IRA was not at all on our mind when this was happening for us. We couldn't forecast for our taxpayers what that would mean for them. But two things have been helpful. First, the MSBA changed their policy on third-party funding. So after, I think it was June 2023, the MSBA has ever since said that if there is an incremental third-party funding, as long as it's not actually a double payment, the MSBA reimbursement on the project would not be reduced by the amount of that third-party funding. So that was a big win for Westwood taxpayers, because now that the IRA is in place and we're eligible for that direct pay program through the IRA, we find that that revenue can go directly back to reducing the borrowing. So that was, and we have made the decision, so the town has made the decision to use it in that way. So I'll speak more about the IRA program and our claim size in a few minutes, but I would say that again, the takeaway was for us, the expertise of the people who were on the team, the SBC in particular at this early phase, and the fact that they didn't kind of prematurely commit to capping the budget, and a willingness to value engineer some things out of the project in order to pay for that incremental $3.5 million that we had to face to incorporate a geothermal system. And there were some things that were given up here, as beautiful as it is as a building, but we didn't get everything we wanted.
Did you want to speak about the IRA right now?
Yes, I could transition right into it. Unless there's a question, but maybe we can take questions at the end. Yeah. Okay. So, as for the IRA, so as I mentioned, our building had really been designed and construction was already underway before the full parameters of the IRA program were well understood. So we didn't design this for that program. That situation is now different. So projects can design mindfully, but we did engage and engineer, consultant, who's actually an engineer and a tax attorney, who we hired and engaged for supporting us with our IRA claim. And we found this person through a referral. It was Sarah Ross with Undaunted K-12 who pointed us to him, and our energy manager connected with Sarah Ross. So that was how we found our consultant. The company name is Energy Tax Savers. And so they came on board as we were already in construction. We're nearly complete actually when they came on board. And the cost of that contract was about almost $19,000. Well worth it given what you'll hear about the reimbursement. So they joined, they explained to us that since the building was 100% reliance on the ground source heat pump, we were eligible to claim almost all of the HVAC costs in the claim related to the geothermal system that we had. So although the incremental cost of the geothermal was maybe $3.6 million, the amount of the system that we could claim was far larger. So the HVAC system total subcontract value for us was $10.3 million. The geothermal wells and vaults 3.7, and we were also able to claim 1% of the design and the OPM costs associated with this system on that IRA claim. So we added those in. So the total claim was around $18 million for the geothermal system that we submitted. We have yet to claim a PV array, but we plan to claim that in a second phase, and the EV chargers also have not yet been claimed through the IRA program. So those additional claims that we will submit later have an estimated cost of about $1.8 million. So that after that is submitted, and one condition just to note is that these claims can't be processed or are not accepted by the IRS until the systems are fully operational. So that's important to know. Again, we were so early in this phase. We were so early as a district in claiming through the IRA that there are slightly different considerations that we had. For us, it wasn't worthwhile to pursue incentives for domestic content or U.S.-made product, but just know that for your projects, that is one layer that's really important now. The IRA specifies that there is an additional incentive for building projects that incorporate that. We also didn't determine whether we had any eligible apprenticeship programs, which would have also given us an incremental credit. But again, our project was so far in, we didn't want to go back and trace all of these details. If you design forward, you can design mindfully to maximize how much money you could get back through that direct pay program. What else would I tell you? I think those are some of the important pieces. I would say the apprenticeships and the domestic content requirements are pretty stringent from what I understand. So those are something to really learn and understand and have an expert look at before you are well underway in the project. Once we determined what was pursuing in our claim, our OPM was able to quickly and efficiently deliver the costs from the eligible project components, and then the consultant, that tax consultant, teased out those costs from ineligible costs, and he prepared the filing. He's staying on board with us all the way through the audit. And again, that's all covered under that fixed fee. So it hasn't been a heavy lift for me in terms of managing the project, and I thank the OPM also for keeping tight records, but that's part of the if you're an MSBA project, you have to keep tight records anyway for all of these pieces. There is a clause in the IRA law that specifies that local government projects financed by tax-exempt government bonds have a 15% reduction in the amount of the credit. So that's an interesting detail that I've also seen and had to learn about. Our consultant has told us he doesn't think we're going to take that 15% reduction, but just to explain how that math works. Hypothetically, if you have a $100,000 solar array, and hypothetically, if you're receiving the full, in our case, we received we're anticipating a 30% credit. So on a $100,000 project, that would be $30,000 in direct pay credit back to Westwood. That 15% reduction would mean a reduction of 15% on the 30%. So then your credit would be $25,500. So our consultant again thought that in our case we were not going to get that cut, due to the financing of the project. However, he did advise us to be proactive and to set aside the money in escrow until the full period of the audit had passed. So we're taking that measure, once we receive the funds, which we haven't yet. And that's something to think about in all of these scenarios. Just as you estimate how much is coming back from the IR program, you've got to look at the each step of the credits and what you are able to obtain and any reductions, if any, that will apply. The process from the start of the IR application through to the anticipated refund, in our experience, was about 6 to 9 months. 6 is really ambitious, like realistically 9 months, because it does take time to collect the paperwork. It takes time to process it. They have quarterly filing deadlines, and then they issue the cash payment to districts about 45 days after that quarterly filing deadline that they have. We expect our payment somewhere in December, and we are looking at between 4.5 and 4.8 million coming back through our IRA claim. That's our first IRA claim, and there's an additional claim, as I said, for the PV array and the chargers, which we have not yet made. And that will go to reducing borrowing on the project. So that's a lot of information, quite technical. We were not able to forecast this for our voters. I can imagine it is difficult to explain to folks what this all means, but we're already practiced in speaking to our town residents and our voters about what an MSBA reimbursement is and why it's so important to be a part of the MSBA program. So this is potentially a parallel process. It's a process of educating voters about what the full authorization and the full cost of the building is, but ultimately what the borrowing costs will be if all is done according to plan. The borrowing costs should be much lower.
So did I hear you right, 4.8 million?
4.8, yeah, hopefully.
In December.
In December.
Happy holidays.
Thank you. Perfect time.
So we wanted to end with something more complicated than geothermal wells. And so I think we found the subject matter in the federal tax credit, although Lemma did a fantastic job. You also heard that they're working with a tax attorney, which is highly recommended to do. So that's great stuff. Westwood is one of 3 districts. Eligibility for applying for this is for projects that were substantially complete on or after January 2023. So the first 3 districts out in filing. Westwood, we also have Westboro, who's looking at potentially additional 1.8 million, and Ashland looking at an additional 2.2 million. And you are too.
Much like Westboro.
When are you filing?
When?
Did you already have?
Today, so.
Well, hopefully it's being met. All right, excellent. I will add you to my list. Thank you for that. And you're applying too?
Non-geothermal, looks like we make that, looks like the
PV, excellent. Yeah, that's great stuff. We are thinking of having a session in early 2025 for those people who have gone through and navigated this, because it is, it is intimidating. Like I said, geothermal is one thing, dealing with the IRS is a second. So with that, we're in our final 7 minutes. So anyone have any additional questions for Lemma at this time, and then I'll close us up. Questions?
When do you recommend bringing on a consultant, a tax consultant?
I think because now you can design, mindfully for it, you may want to bring them on early on, just to understand what is important to track. And you also want to know if your OPM fully understands the parameters of the IRA program. So if your OPM is able to ramp up and support in this level and advises you to delay, could delay. But I think there are, because of the domestic content piece and because of the apprenticeships, you really want to have some tax attorney support early on.
Can I just add to that? I just wanted to add about the domestic content and coming on.
Step forward so people can hear you.
About the domestic content and that sort of question, from an architect's perspective, that is important, because if it is something that you want to integrate into your specifications and have it go out to bid that way, it is a publicly bid project, right? So the other thing you have to think about is, okay, so if we include that language in there, are there 3 other manufacturers that all can provide that domestic content and meet that criteria? So that's the other layer of unknown in that domestic content question.
Other questions?
I was just wondering if you could, sorry, Abby from Needham, if you could share any more about why your consultant thought you wouldn't be hit with the 15% haircut? Because my impression was like, oh, if you're using taxes and bonds, like, that's it, 15%. Is it just because you were using other sources of financing for the project, or?
I honestly, and I think our energy manager, so I have not had an opportunity to ask him this question, but I've been wondering myself. But again, we're taking a very conservative approach by setting aside the funds. So I can find out and let you know, because it's one of the questions I have with our energy manager left. He was here earlier and he might know, but he's not here anymore.
Did that language have to roll into your warrant article and in any way? In other words, getting those reimbursements, it oftentimes just goes into the general fund and not necessarily a credit to the project.
So what I found is there was a recent Division of Local Services memo that specifies how those funds should be treated by municipalities when they're received. So that it wasn't incorporated into our warrant article because we didn't have an IRA program at the time when we went out for that vote, but for the funding authorization. But there is that guidance from the Division of Local Services, so I would look to that.
And Barbara just shared with me that that memo that I was referring to is in the materials from the QR code, so you can have that available. All right, so I think I'm gonna close us up here. You know, I started off earlier this morning writing down as I heard some wonderful advice, and my list is so long now. I was gonna close with it, but I'd have to keep you here for another 45 minutes. So we won't do that. But you have talked about the capital costs, upfront costs people are talking about, but also remember the long-term operational costs. You have to think about both things for the project. And I would share with you that you've been hearing from teams this morning who, you know, they were where you were. They were where you are now, and they've learned along the way. The good news for you is you've just heard from all of their experience, and there's a lot of learning going on out there. They've faced issues, and they have survived. So try to remember that as you're in the throes of some pretty tough decisions. I know that's hard. As I said, just remember that a lot of the material, the agenda, the bios, the building information, the PowerPoints, this memo will all be in your QR code.